Hey, everybody, welcome back to Music 101. I am joined with a very special guest, Luke from Great Good Fine Okay, as well as many other things that I am excited to dig into. And we're going to talk about all the things that we talk about on this podcast: production, making music, being in a band right now, going on tour. So, without further ado, Luke, how are you doing? Thanks for joining.
I'm doing good, Scoob. Thanks for having me on.
For sure, man. I hear you have a tour coming up. That's super exciting.
Yeah. So with my band, Great Good Fine Okay, we're going out for like pretty much most of the month of April.
Awesome.
So kind of just starting to get things ready for that.
That's awesome. Get the rehearsals going. I saw you had a set list post asking for people to chip in songs they want to hear on tour. I love that.
Yeah, trying to tap into the hive mind a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's definitely like, at this point we just have way more stuff than we can fit into even an hour and a half set.
Of course.
So we're just trying to find the sweet spot of like, new things from the past year that we've put out, plus everyone's favorites from the last like 6-7 years.
I love it. Your debut is in 2013. So yeah, you got almost 10 years of...
Yeah, we've been at it for a minute here.
Love it. That's awesome. Well, excited to talk about that. I think maybe we should start just talking about what it actually goes into preparing for a tour. Because I feel like most people just kind of see the end product. They see the band comes through and they see the show. But they don't like think about all of the different decisions from, maybe like you guys are a duo, but then you have additional musicians come play. Maybe like we could talk about the rehearsals, the experience of like inviting more people into a sound. Like for example, I'm a solo artist, but I want to play with people live. It expands things. How do you kind of go about like finding that fit, finding the people that you want to take with you on tour, or deciding like, are we going to do a duo thing? Are we going to do a 4-piece? Like how do you kind of like go about like thinking that through?
Yeah. So I guess, when John and I started the project in 2013, after we kind of just made one song together and we were like, this is cool. We should keep doing this and, see what else happens.
Yeah.
And we sort of got to a point where it was like, starting to gain some traction and things were doing well on Hype Machine.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that thing?
Oh, yeah. I remember that thing. That was like the godsend when you're like, oh, we're trending on Hype Machine. Yeah, that was
totally.
huge.
It's like, it feels like it was easier to put music out back then because,
I agree.
You weren't just like, at the whims of Spotify editorial playlists.
It was both broader. If people don't know what it is, like you had like all these different blogs that would post about you, and if you got on enough blogs, it would aggregate it, and then you'd be trending as like somebody that you like. It had that sense of if you connect with a larger community, and then it can pipeline you up to people that are just trend watchers. It was the best
right,
of
and I
both
think
worlds.
the way we had done it is we knew someone at one specific blog that was particularly influential, and a lot of other blogs looked to this blog, sort of as like a tastemaker,
for sure.
And once we got picked up by them, like all these other people started to see it, and then it just started taking off on Hype Machine. So yeah, it was good to get some eyes and ears on it right from the get go.
Totally.
But so that was in like, maybe August or September of 2013, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Cool.
And then we got selected to play at South by Southwest the following March. And that was going to be like the debut of, the live show and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided that we wanted it to be a band in some way. John and I had both played in, various other bands coming up before that. So we knew we wanted it to be more than just the two of us on stage with like tons of tracks going.
Exactly.
We've always had backing tracks in the live show, but we wanted it to be, something where most of the parts were being covered by actual humans.
Right.
And I mean, the band originally was a 5-piece.
Oh, really?
Cool. Yeah, and it's now a 4-piece. Couple people have shifted in and out, but the current iteration of the band, we've been playing with these guys for probably 4 or 5 years at this point.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How
and
do
they're
you...
just, they're just homies. They're just guys that I went to music school with.
Oh, I love it. I love it. How do you go about like? So I know that this is a hard thing for a lot of musicians and also music fans. Like I think have sometimes like a hard time grappling with the idea of tracks. Like some people are like morally opposed to it. Other people have like a really hard time even knowing what's in a track or like what's going on. How do you like go through that idea, that like process of being like, okay, this should be a part or this should be adapted or even ignored, but this part is so supportive, like an arpeggiator or something that like needs to be super locked to the click, or I don't know, something like that. Like how do you decide what gets thrown to a musician or gets thrown into the track, the backing track on the computer?
That's a great question. I think, and I mean, there's even some instances where like things will sort of be coming from both.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Just for like reinforcement or,
Right.
you know, because the thing is like, you just want it to sound, or at least for me in this setting, you know, I just want it to sound really good and tight and, you know, full.
Yeah.
I guess the biggest challenge for us is John does a lot of falsetto vocals, and you know those tend to be pretty low volume coming into a microphone, and this microphone is also on a stage with an actual drum set. You know, sometimes only like 5 feet behind him. So it's like this. It ends up just being a room mic for the drum set.
Yes.
So you know, just to make sure like the vocals cut through enough, we do have like, you know, a fair bit of those on the track, especially on just choruses or things where it's supposed to be, you know, super in your face.
I hear that. Like, do you also think of like stereo for those kind of sections? Like that's something that I always am curious with. Some people are mono tracks, some people stereo tracks. I feel like sometimes one of the beauties of choruses, just to make them feel like a chorus even, is like, it opens up.
Yeah, and I think totally. You know, that's interesting because some clubs you get into and it's the system is totally mono.
I know.
Like there's just no stereo.
Yeah. I've been there.
So actually, you know, I think the initial versions of everything was a little less refined, and you know, we were just doing tracks out of one stereo output.
Yeah.
But now we do it where we have like a stereo pair of vocals, a stereo pair of track, which is just everything else.
Yeah.
And then a mono bass track.
Cool.
And then if there's any like stereo information that's in the bass of the song, I'll just kind of like
filter
mid-side that so that it's just like the sides are going into the tracks channels.
Got it. Yeah.
And that just that way the front of house engineer can kind of
have some control,
adapt things.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you use in terms of like splitting that and feeding it out to the board, like to be able to have all those different stereo outputs?
So it's all running out of Ableton.
Nice.
And you know, every song is a little bit different in terms of like what's within the Ableton session that I have access to be able to turn up and down. Sometimes it's like, you know, we're in the tech rehearsal before the tour and it's like I'm literally sitting there printing out just what should be in the track, and it just comes out, you know, as a 2-track.
For sure.
But other times I have like a little more control, where I have just various stems that I'm kind of rebalancing, and then sending out of those outputs.
Cool. Very cool. And then the actual like hardware that you use, like coming out of Ableton on a computer, obviously coming out of Ableton and then sending it out to the board. Do you have like a audio interface or something like that?
So we use this thing. It's called the iConnectivity.
Nice.
What's the name of it? It's sort of like specifically built for, you know, doing live stuff because it has a redundant USB input.
Ooh.
So you can actually have 2 computers plugged into it at once. And as soon as it, you know, loses connection to one, it just flips over to the other.
Dang, that's awesome. How cool is that?
So you know.
Yeah, look that up because I'm totally going to steal that from you.
Yeah, we don't use that. We don't use that feature of it. But
yeah, totally. But it's cool, like this.
It's the iConnectivity Play Audio 12. So it just has 12 mono outputs.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'll have to check that out. Speaking of Ableton, I want to talk a little bit about DAWs because I just had some people kind of hitting me up on Reddit. Shout out to people that message each other on Reddit, which is like not a very large community. Like I have like, like 7 followers or something on Reddit. I don't know, maybe a little more than that, but those are like, holy crap, I have Reddit followers. Like who follows each other on Reddit? But anyway, some people were sliding in my DMs asking me about where they should start going into audio production and wanting to look at a digital audio workstation, DAW. What's your take on it? Obviously, Ableton has got some benefits for live. I'm loving what they're doing with like the community and the ability to like quickly build plugins and stuff like that. So I kind of feel like Ableton might be the future. But I just wanted to pick your brain on it. What do you use? What do you prefer? Different things for different situations?
I use Studio One.
Cool. Sweet.
I switched over to that in 2018 from using Logic for probably 10 years.
Okay.
And I've always kind of used Pro Tools off and on in the background.
For sure.
I think the first one I ever used was a combination of Fruity Loops.
Nice.
And Acid Pro music.
Yeah, I had Acid Pro music. That was my first DAW too.
Yeah. Loop Town. So I would like use the demo of Fruity Loops to like export loops.
Oh, cool.
Because there was no restriction for that. You just couldn't like save a song.
That's funny.
And then I would kind of construct them in Ableton.
I love
Acid.
I love how all those weird like product demo or like software demo things end up creating. Like I do the same thing where like I have this, I think it's called Twangstrom, and it's a spring reverb. And it's ridiculously expensive, but it lets you demo it and then like bounce things out. But every once in a while, it'll just have like this epic white noise swell. Yeah. I just think it's so funny how like I think I actually snuck one of those white noise swells into one of the songs. It's like, that is hilarious of this like.
Oh, it's not just
demos.
a burst. It's like it's like an ocean wave.
Yeah, totally. That just takes over all of your audio. But I think it's funny how those things end up like on like definitely not intended, but they end up sparking creative workarounds.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of fun. Cool. That's cool. So definitely, I'm mostly a Pro Tools guy, but I'm probably switching after this record, probably to Ableton, just from what I've been seeing from my friends. But
yeah. Ableton does seem really cool. I guess I've only really used it as a way to drive our live show.
That's the only way I've used it too, is I've only used it in like the actual Ableton live capacity. Like, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like I know it pretty well, but I haven't, I don't think I've really taken it through its paces in a creative sense.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not so hip to just like all the kind of sound mangling possibilities that exist there.
Oh yeah. It's pretty incredible. And it seems a little bit more, I don't know, like geared towards super fast workflows, and they have like really nice search bars and stuff like that for plugins and things, which I find kind of attractive, instead of like on Pro Tools, I'm like going through different menus and yeah.
So Studio One has all of that stuff you're talking about, like has all the search. It's very drag and drop.
Nice.
It has Melodyne integrated into the interface.
That's fun.
So you can literally click like, any region that you want to Melodyne, hit Command M, and it just pops up.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. Can you, so for people that don't know, Melodyne is like Auto-Tune, but a lot more control, at least in my experience.
Yeah, it's a lot more hands-on.
Yeah. And you can also do like crazy stuff with it. I've been really enjoying playing with formants in Melodyne. Like,
yeah, the whole thing down at the bottom where you can, adjust the structure of all the levels of the individual harmonics.
Yes. Crazy stuff.
That thing has some pretty nuts like sound design possibilities.
Exactly. Totally. I did. So I have a hyperpop song that I did with my friend called 5G Baby. And like literally the entire song is just a like pad that was created out of like a chant and people playing in a playground and stuff, but like pitched it into the key and then messed with the formant and the harmonics and stuff like that. And then it turned into this weird synthesizer. It's very unsettling, but because it's hyperpop, that's kind of what you want, I guess.
Yep, exactly.
So anyway, I want to talk about like creative workflow and like production, arranging kind of stuff like that.
Sure.
So how do you usually, start a song? Does it come from different paths? Like, how do you kind of get into that mode of experimentation, and you have a blank session? How do you start to fill that up?
Man, it's kind of different every time,
Same.
I think.
Yeah, same for me. Yeah.
It's like it'll be whatever I'm kind of into at that moment. Like,
Do you feel like this is kind of my process. Like I'll have some nucleus. I don't know what it'll be. It might be a rhythm, it might be a synth, it might be a guitar part, a vocal line, whatever. And then I'll just kind of like dance around that nucleus. Do you have kind of like a similar process, or do you like plan things out more and more pre-pro?
Sometimes, I will, if I know I'm kind of like going into a, concerted writing effort time period, I'll sort of just like set some stuff up for myself, like give myself some parameters.
Okay.
Like maybe build a template to use.
What does that look like? Like a template in terms of like form, or kind of like the different
just
tracks?
like more just like these are the synths I'm going to use.
Cool.
Like here's a bunch of like tracks with like weird vocal effects that I can just like,
okay.
Throw a vocal down onto it and it'll like do something fun.
Okay. That's cool. It's fun.
Yeah, but just like, a few of like the synths that I'm using most. And then that way, like, when I sit down to actually just come up with stuff,
yeah,
I sort of have a bunch of stuff ready to go.
Nice. That's cool. So you're basically like taking some of the like production and like arranging like workflows and separating them a little bit, so you can be more creative on the actual part writing while making some of the creative decisions ahead of time in terms of like at least starting sounds.
Yeah. And so I guess like to give you a little context, the way that it's usually happening is like, I'll be in the room with John, with other writers as well.
Cool.
And so there's, it's usually just like, okay, cool. Like, what are you guys feeling today? You know? Sometimes like someone will just throw out like a feeling or like, any kind of thing to just sort of inform what the vibe is.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll just be sitting around, playing different patches, and someone will be like, whoa, that's really cool. Let's make something out of that.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And it just sort of, once something gets sort of thrown out that everyone sort of grabs onto, I feel like you just kind of take that and run with it.
Love it. And that kind of sparks that like collaboration.
Exactly.
Yeah. Then moving on from there, so like say you like wrote a song, you have kind of a demo, a general kind of vibe. Maybe not everything is all fleshed out. How do you take that to that next level? Like that pre-mixing, but like that
finishing?
Yeah, like that.
Are we talking finishing?
The finishing, like that is before the polishing. That time is super fascinating to me, because like a lot is talked about like mixing and mastering. A lot is talked about songwriting, but what about that middle gap? Like, how do you take it from there to there?
So you mean like after you have sort of the whole song mapped out?
Yeah, so like
more or less,
like that like kind of liminal area of like, you have the song form, you have the lyrics, you have the melody, you have most things tracked, and now it's kind of like time to add in the sweeteners, add in maybe like a bass track or finalize some things, like maybe there's some stuff that's like, that's a demo synth, like I want to dig deeper into that sound. That moment where it goes from being a demo to being like a record, like the thing that switches it over to being like, real.
I wish that was just like a moment like that just happened.
Yeah.
It's more often than not like just a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
A lot of experimentation.
Yeah.
A lot of like, sometimes in the initial session I'll get lucky and I'll pick some good sounds that I can really just sort of run with until it's done. But yeah, I mean, I feel like most of the time it's sort of like, okay, this is really good, but it could be, better, and just kind of have more of a purpose sonically, and, just be more the right sound.
Yes.
Because I feel like, it's really easy to just fall into the trap of like trying to keep mixing something and tweaking the sound, you know, with EQs and everything like that until it works right. But I feel like the more direct route is just to figure out the right sound.
That's a really great point, and something that I did want to talk to you about. I think the hardest thing for me is synth design. I know that might be one of your greatest strengths. Can you talk about, like, the reason why it's hardest for me is because it is so easy to change, at least with software synths. I feel like that might be one of the benefits for analog synths, but like, it's so easy to be like, no, completely different. Like fundamentally changing the waveform, even like everything about the processing, choosing a different software synth. There's just like infinite possibility. How do you, like, when you're doing synth design, try and make that process like more less sporadic, or like how do you find like that's the sound, or do you just kind of like hunt and then end up stumbling on something, or is it like way more intentional? I'm always curious.
It's all of the above.
All of the above.
Honestly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
totally.
It's sometimes I'll be, you know, I'll have a section of a song that just, you know, needs like a really specific kind of sound. Maybe there's like, you know, some reference that I really like, and
for sure,
you know,
yeah,
kind of geeking out trying to get something to just fit in sort of the same way.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, like a lot of times I'll just sort of rapid fire make like a bunch of different versions of it.
Okay, that's smart.
Sort of like
that's cool.
Copy the track down and just try it on a different synth, try it with a different patch, like try it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then go through and edit after the fact, like take a break from it, come back.
Cool.
And then be like, maybe, you know, one of these by itself is the best one, or maybe like this one with like a tiny bit of this one under it.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't need like these other layers.
Yes.
So like that's one approach. Another one is just, you know, being like, I'm gonna do this with the Juno.
Cool.
Or like I'm gonna do it with the Prophet.
Right.
And just sort of like zoning in. Maybe a lot of times I'll have the MIDI sending out to the actual hardware synth.
Okay.
So that I can then be, you know, adjusting the envelopes and the filters in real time.
Great way to do it. Yep.
And
totally.
I think that sort of gives you, it always is going to give you something that's a little more human. Even if it's like a super quantized part, if you're there, like actually moving the knobs.
Yes.
You know, you're kind of like helping it to breathe with, you know, the vocals or whatever it's accompanying.
Yeah. I like that too, because you're kind of, just like you were talking about with those like arranging songwriting sessions, finding moments to kind of separate out the process. I find that really valuable too, where it's like, okay, I got the part, let's get the sound, and then you can route that MIDI over to an actual analog synth or something like that, where you can start playing tactilely. That it unlocks something for sure.
Yeah, I think having the right part is a big. That's like the most important thing. Having the right notes. Like making sure the notes are like taking up the right, like if the voicing of the chord is like off in like too high or too low, that can throw things off. If it's like too spread out when it needs to be more clustered together, that can throw things off.
Yes.
But that's, it's just all down to like how that part fits in against like, you know, whatever else is going on, the bass and the vocals. And
that's something I also want to talk about. I've only recently started to consider myself a mixing engineer. I mean, like I've been doing production for the last 10, 15 years or something crazy. But I always handed off my productions to somebody else to clean it up, to do the adult work. like go ahead and make it real, make it sound better, make things not step on each other. Last 2 or 3 years, I've been really trying to focus more on mixing, and the last like year and a half in particular. And I feel like it's changed my sound and like the way I approach arranging. And I want to see if this is kind of similar to you, because just what I'm getting from your answers are kind of giving me that vibe. Now I think more in terms of frequencies, even the notes sometimes, like you're talking about like those glue tones, like the things that are going to be like reacting to the other instruments and like sitting well in a mix and filling up the sonic spectrum and all that kind of stuff. I love what you do in your band, of like the feeling of being incredibly full and then cutting it more sparse. I feel like you do a great job with like contrast, and your level of fullness is higher than I think some people are able to get to. Like, because then it sounds cluttered. I never feel like your stuff sounds cluttered. It just sounds bigger. Like you have like curtains that open up and it's like wider now and it's brighter and it's got more things going on. When you're arranging, do you think slightly from that mixing engineer side, and do you think that like your time on the technical side has influenced like your musical creative arranging brain?
I think, yeah, they definitely both sort of influence each other.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of crossover between the two.
Cool.
So I have a background in, writing music for big band,
Cool.
jazz big band.
Cool. I didn't know that.
And
That's awesome.
and some like orchestra writing. I did that in college a bunch.
Yeah.
And so I guess that sort of just got me thinking about like, okay, we have these different sort of sections. You have 5 saxophones, you have 4 trombones, you have 4 trumpets.
Okay.
They all have different like ranges. There's like different things that sound good together. You can have like maybe 2 saxophones, a trombone, and a trumpet doing something, and like split up the band into all these different groups.
For sure.
But yeah, I think doing that, and like just maybe even more so with my background as a keyboardist.
Okay.
You start to hear like when just you start to learn those harmonic sort of relationships.
Okay.
Like what's the lowest you can play this kind of a voicing.
Okay. Yeah.
Before it starts sounding muddy,
Right.
Like
Right.
how far can you push that? And I think that goes a long way into like, helping things feel big or small.
It's a good point. That's a really good point. I am a bit obsessed with the idea of scale, because I think it's one of the most interesting parts of arranging and mixing and the way that they fit in together. What do you think about like in terms of the way bass plays into that? I always kind of feel like that's, for me at least, is like that's my scale button. It's like whether or not the bass guitar is in, but
totally.
I always mix it
Well,
super
it's
loud.
sort of like it sort of informs how high above it you can build in a way.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
I'd like to hear more on that. What like how so? Like is like a foundational thing, like the whole tower will collapse if you don't have that foundation, or is it something more about like the harmonic series that it opens up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, well, it's like how loud and how low is the bass.
Okay.
And what kind of a bass is it too? Like, do you need to hear the harmonics of it? Like, is it like a super clean, like 808 sub bass where you sort of need to like leave a lot of space above that frequency wise so that it cuts through and you hear it?
Yeah.
Or is it like a more rich, like electric bass with a pick?
Right.
That's gonna cut through more, and you can sort of use it almost as a percussion instrument.
Totally.
Yeah, I feel like what the bass is and what it's doing is gonna inform a lot of the things about the mix.
That's a great point, and I totally agree. I've been doing a weird thing arranging wise that I think it works for me. I'm not sure if it will work for other people who are like in a more collaborative setting, but I've been recording the bass last, like even after final vocal. Sometimes I'll have like a ghost bass in there, but oftentimes I'm just like kind of flying blind, dropping the bass as like the ultimate glue guy. Cause I feel like it's, I'm a more of a fretted guy, like fretted, like guitar bass guy. And that's like, I guess my equivalent to like what you're saying on keys is like at the very end, then I have more of a perspective of like, oh, this needs picked bass, or this needs palm muted.
That makes a lot of sense because, I feel like you sneak a lot of melodic action into your bass parts.
I want it to be like quasi counterpoint with some of my bass parts. Like, I want it to dance with the melody. I don't think I always pull it off, but that is at least my goal.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think I spent a lot of time thinking about that too, sort of in like a, especially when you like listen to like, James Jamerson or some of that
100%.
like Motown stuff. It's like just the way that the bass serves the melody, I think is super important.
Yes.
And can just totally change the feeling of a song.
Totally. And it opens you up, I think, to be simpler in other like domains. when the
Right.
bass is being that supportive. I love how like I don't know. There's this like sense of like at least one of the things I'm trying to get to is like sampling music. I'm trying to inform my own music by the way that people sample other people's music. Like trying to be recursive about that. Like think about like how would I sample myself, and then like how do I part right around those kind of ideas. I feel like that's a similar conversation to that like mixing, arranging conversation, the conversation with like other genres and stuff like that. Like, can you talk about maybe places you draw influences, places that like songs that you're into? You were even just playing like some stuff on your Spotify that I thought sounded pretty cool in the before we started recording. You talk about some some of the like maybe places that would surprise people, be like, oh, you know, I'm like really into like 18th century polka or something.
My number one favorite band of all time is Steely Dan.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's, you know, being like a jazz head, it's sort of it's you know, it's jazzy, but it's also like just super precise. And you know, they really like spared no expense in just getting like the absolute best band and performance for every single track on every single album.
Yes. I think I'm a gaucho guy. I think that's my number one. Where do you fall in terms of?
Yeah, I think I would agree.
Nice.
I think that it just seems like sort of the arrival point of it, you know? I'm definitely a big fan of like the Fagan solo stuff also from the 80s.
Totally.
The Nightfly specifically.
Awesome. Super good.
Yeah, I mean, I love Asia too. Asia and Gaucho.
Yeah, cool. Same page here.
Yeah. Nice.
So no, I mean, Bernard Purdy is the reason why I started to try and play drums. I'm still not really a drummer, but he's at least the person to blame for my ambitions.
I mean, yeah. He's just the best.
Totally. So yeah, I'm with all that. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of that mixing process now. So like you got the tracks down, you got the sounds locked in. Obviously I don't know, maybe not obviously. Do you have some mixing along the way? Like, are you kind of like shaping these things along the way, or do you just kind of come to it fresh at the end?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, even starting on the first day, like as the demo is going down, I'm mixing it, I'm mastering it, you know?
Cool. You got like
I'm just
the
like,
limiter
what does
on
this sound like when it's loud? Is it like really, because that'll tell you right away if like, you know, your bass is too loud or like something's just really out of whack.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah, so I like to throw that, you know, just ozone thing on there and do like the autopilot feature and have it just do whatever, you know, the robots think should happen.
Cool.
A lot of times I throw things up onto Lander, which is another AI mastering service. That's actually quite good. I think, you know, sometimes it's not like perfectly what you want, but it'll always sort of give me some information. Like, you know, your mid range is maybe a little too clustered, or you know, things that I should maybe take another look at.
Yes.
So yeah, in a way that those things sort of just save me time of, you know, things that I might realize if I like took a month off from the song and then came back to it, or if I you know, sent it to a friend and had them listen to it.
Helps you get that like kind of new perspective.
Yeah, it helps you get some objectivity to it.
That's a good way of looking at it. I like that a lot. I actually my first few records are released with Lander masters.
Hey, I mean,
they don't sound great. I think they're like it sounds fine. I don't think anybody's gonna be, but there is like a noticeable. I have a song called "Moving to Canada," and everything after that like instantly sounds better because I'm using a real mastering engineer for the rest. But
there are great good Final K songs that have been Lander.
I love it.
Sometimes it just wins. I don't know.
I agree.
It depends a lot on like what you put into it.
That's true.
I think
that's the whole thing, right? Is like, I think one of the most interesting things about like mastering chains in particular, and do you do your own mastering, or at least kind of some of it?
I do. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things that I mix for other people, I also master.
Cool. That makes sense. I feel like a lot of
with Great Good Final Case stuff, I like to get it mastered by someone else.
Yeah. Same. I'm on the same
since
page.
I've spent so much time with it, you know.
Totally. I think it's so interesting how like I don't know. I've developed like a really good relationship. Riley Knapp is the guy who masters my stuff. He had a project, RKCB, that's really cool. And he's making other music too. He's like has a certain vibe that like now I find I'm mixing for. Like I hear like, okay, this is what he will kind of do. I have kind of
interesting.
It's almost like I'm mixing to his mastering chain somehow.
Cool.
After it's like after a year and a half or something like that, you start to like get a vibe. I feel like the same thing with Lander. Like after you put stuff into Lander, after a while, you start to like think like, oh no, that shaker's gonna be too loud if I Lander this, or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You get an idea of like how things are gonna come back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. On the mixing process, do you like to like solo stuff? Listen to things on their own, things in groups. I know everybody's kind of got their own flavor. Some people leave the vocal on the entire mixing session. Do you have any sort of like?
So I guess this question really would only have to do with like things that I get just
exactly.
as a mixer, right?
Just as a mixing engineer, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, I guess usually I try to get the drums sounding good.
For sure.
I think that, just really sets the vibe of the record.
Mm-hmm.
Drums and bass.
Do you do
vocals.
drums like all at the same time, or do you like go super hard on like kick snare and then bring everybody in? Or
it sort of just depends on the song. Like if it's like a actual kit with multiple mics, there's like things I'll do with like gates and stuff like that just to clean it up a little bit.
Yep.
And for that I will probably solo things.
Yeah, for sure. Same.
Yeah, I mean if it's like an electronic, like just a bunch of samples and stuff, then maybe it's just like a balancing thing or like slight EQs. I'll show you this thing.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is what I use like when I'm just sitting down and like doing a mix.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Soft tube console 1.
Dope.
So the top part is kind of just like all the components of a channel strip from any console. So you have like the input gain, high cut, low cut, the first dynamics section, which has like sort of like a transient designer thing, like attack and decay, and a gate as well.
Cool.
And then EQ, compressor, and then there's a drive knob.
Nice.
Which will depending on what type of like console you have loaded into it, sort of like emulates whatever sort of harmonic distortion or saturation you would have gotten from using an SSL or a Neve or whatever.
For sure.
And yeah, I think that using that just really helped me kind of get faster.
Yes.
I feel like before I started using that, it was harder for me to do a mix in one day.
For sure.
Yeah, but now I feel like, it's so hands-on. You're just, making decisions, and before you know it, it's like, wow, this is starting to come together.
Yes. I love that like you're saying, it's not quite a switch, but you feel that like the tides start to turn. There's at least for me, there tends to be a dip where it's like, what have I done? Like I need to start like, and then it all kind of comes together. It flips over.
Yeah, like the uncanny valley.
Yeah, totally. I end up there a lot. That's okay. There's a value of living there every once in a while too.
Totally.
I think it's so interesting, like talking to people that are involved in every stage of that process, and then also people that have moments of isolation. Like I'm doing that too now, where I'm just mixing people, and it's such an interesting, like kind of brain bender to an extent, at least for me, of like, well, I wouldn't have made that decision, but like, do I want to now force this synthesizer into like my world and like saturate the hell out of it or anything like that, or like let it be its own thing? Like, how do you approach that as a mixing engineer? Are you just trying to like make the song like the best it possibly can be, or do you feel like you're kind of putting your own thumbprint on it? I feel like I'm putting my own thumbprint on it. Like, just to be honest.
Yeah, I think.
I don't know if I'm a transparent mixing engineer.
Yeah, it depends on like. It depends on the song. It depends on like how it was recorded. It depends on the artist. Just,
for sure.
And I think like, but you're probably right. A lot of that is like what, how does it affect me? Like, what does it make me think? What does it make me like want to change about it?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, I do spend a lot of time A/Bing with the rough mix that came to me.
That's smart. Yeah, totally. I do that too.
Because I feel like everybody spends a lot of time on their stuff before you get it.
Exactly.
And you just want to make sure that you're not taking away any of the magic that was there.
Right.
Just for the sake of like cleaning things up or
exactly.
whatever.
Exactly. That on that point, tom mics are always really tricky for me because like on a real live drum kit, there is so much bleed in a tom mic, and you maybe hit the tom twice in the whole song. So my instinct.
Yeah, tom mics kind of just generally don't sound good.
Right, totally. That's my instinct, is just clip that off and then we're good. But every once in a while, especially if they didn't have like a room mic or they didn't have something like that, you clip it off and you're like, oh, it's so clean now. And you're not sure if that's what they were looking for. So one of the things I want to say to listeners is, like, at least from my perspective, don't be scared to process your stuff or like make decisions before the mixing engineer. Like, it's so much easier. Like, from my perspective, if somebody sent me their drum track and they clipped out the toms, they're like, okay, that's what they wanted. Great. That's what they're looking for. Or if they have the room mics turn on or off, this is a big deal for me, is like, when are room mics on? Like, just like you were talking about with tracks, like the backing vocal, like coming in on a chorus, it makes it feel more like a chorus. Sometimes having a room mic completely changes the dynamic of how the drum kit is interacting with everybody. So,
yep. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, send us less tracks, like, make decisions.
Yeah, exactly. People are scared, and I was too, and I get it, because you don't want to like mess up, because you think, okay, the mixing engineer knows more, and yeah, a lot of times they will in terms of like very specific technical things.
Yeah, but you also know like what sounds good.
Exactly.
If it sounds good, it is.
Yeah,
good.
That's it. I hyperpop has been really fascinating to me, because it is like the ultimate expression of if it sounds good to you, it's good. Like, my mastering engineer friend, he said that he was sent something that was clipping the like not unlimited. It was clipping the Logic thing by like 24 dB or something like that. And he's like, that's what he wanted. So then he mastered that, and it sounds unlike anything I've ever heard, because it is intentionally insane. And there's something there. It's like kind of punk rock. I like it.
Totally. Yeah.
So like, make decisions, and your mastering engineers will know which path, because there are like infinite paths for us to take.
Yep.
It's good for you to point us in the right direction, because, oh man, does it suck when you're like, no, you got to do it all over.
Sometimes though, like, your job is to like kind of mute things here and there. Like, are there too many things going on? Maybe they didn't realize that like this part by itself could sound as good as it
That's a good point.
does.
Right.
And like,
no,
there's
like it.
There's like a lot of, it's like every song is just totally different.
So true. It's so true. And that, I feel like that for me is summed up why mixing is fun, is it's always different, and it's way more creative than I gave it credit for.
Yeah, it's fun, I think, because it's hard.
Yeah, it's super hard.
It's like, if you're the type of person who likes trying to get better at hard things, then like mixing is
for you.
It's right up there. Yeah.
Enjoy Life of Pain and Pleasure.
Right, but it's like, once you get through the painful part and you have that moment where it clicks,
it's all worth it again. Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. I'm trying to think of anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to speak on a bit. Talked about the tour, talked about synths, bass, arranging, songwriting, mixing, a little bit of mastering.
I do some graphic design stuff as well.
Let's talk through that. Yeah, the visual component. That's really fun. Yeah, I see you do a lot of like 3D and kind of like immersive kind of feeling, like world building kind of stuff. Could you talk about like how did you end up working it with graphic design? Like how do you feel like that's an extension of music? It's fascinating.
Well, I guess, initially it was, being in bands, even like back in high school, it's like, okay, we need a poster for this thing coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I have a computer. I'm going to figure out how to do it.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I was always sort of into that stuff. I remember even back in like third grade, I was like the kid who knew how to make those giant banners on the dot matrix printer.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Where like it would just keep spooling out. Love those things.
Those are awesome.
So like the rest of the class would be doing like a math lesson, and she's like, "Hey Luke, go make us the flyer for this thing. We need a banner." I'm like, "Okay,
cool.
Sweet."
Yeah.
But yeah, then the 3D stuff, I just kind of started messing with it. Driving around being on tour with the band and kind of sitting in the backseat of the van, needing something to do.
Yeah.
So I just kind of started teaching myself how to do it.
Cool.
And it's, there's a lot of similarities with music and mixing and producing with, making 3D renderings. It's, there's like a technical challenge to it, but it's very rewarding when everything kind of starts coming together.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really fascinating to me about it is just like, you can build this environment or, an object in 3 dimensions and then start placing lights and, shoot it with a virtual camera.
Yeah.
And then the software will just calculate, based on all of the, physical properties of the objects in your scene, sort of like what happens to those light rays.
Love that.
Like, is this a super shiny object, or is it like, is it refractive? Is the light going to bend when it goes through it?
Yes.
And once you start seeing all of that magic happen, it just is like, yeah, it's super fun.
I love that. It's almost like similar to like how reverb kind of like a good IR reverb is.
Yeah.
All the reflections and dropping your head into a space. That's really cool. Speaking of which, I love the reverbs on your music. I think you do a wonderful job of space creation. And it's one of my favorite things is when the reverb goes away. Oh, I love that.
Right. Yeah, because if there's always reverb, it's like,
yeah,
there's no contrast.
Exactly. I love contrast. So that's a really interesting point with like, virtual cameras. I know that's like, yeah, obviously that's the secret sauce about these 3D renderings is what you can actually do with it once you're, moving things around. How about like animations or like movement within those spaces? Like how do you approach that or like think about that? Especially like the subtle ones. I really think that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's, you just sort of look at the scene and you're like, okay, what can be animated about this?
Cool. Yeah.
Like what can move around? A lot of it is like, just sort of like these dynamics simulations where it's like, this object has mass and there's gravity, and then it's going to be affected by colliding with this other object.
Cool. Yeah.
And so it's just sort of like you set up these constraints and then hit play.
Awesome.
And it kind of just automatically does it, and it looks amazing. The same thing with like, fluid simulations like smoke or water, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point.
Those are a bit more time consuming just because it takes the computer a super long time to calculate.
Yes.
Especially when you get into like millions and millions of particles flying around.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, once you just get all the right initial conditions for that simulation, it, and you get the look that you want, it's super satisfying.
Yeah, it sounds super rewarding. Really, really cool. And starting to dip into some of that, but that's more my buddy Max Horwich, who's doing some stuff in Unity and some kind of like 360 music videos that we're doing where I'm filming on a green screen and then we're putting it into like different environments using like basically, which Unity's like a game engine, VR engine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where all this stuff is really heading.
Yeah.
The angle that I'm kind of coming at it from is like, it's definitely less real time. Like, it'll take anywhere from 20 seconds to like 10 minutes just to render a single frame.
Yeah.
Sometimes, depending on what's in it. And a lot of times you can get something that looks pretty much as good as that out of Unreal or Unity
Mm-hmm.
that plays in real time, and you can like walk around it.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
And we're doing the same stuff with the position of the sun or the virtual lights and stuff. Like one of the things we just released a few weeks ago has got like a disco ball in the middle, and just like the way the things accurately refract off of this disco ball, that alone is like mind blowing to me. I feel like it's easy to sometimes consume some of these things and just be like, yeah, it looks like world, but then taking that step back and being like, no, this is like kind of remarkable that we have gotten so accustomed to like virtual things feeling somewhat realistic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we're starting to get desensitized to it a little bit.
Isn't that weird? It's bizarre.
Totally.
But that's also kind of a fun challenge, I think. And I think your art in particular does a really good job of like ripping them back out. Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like when I'm making those things, it's just sort of like, you sort of lose. I feel like it's the same as like working on any kind of art where you just sort of get in the flow and you're just totally engrossed in what you're doing. I just kind of lose myself a bit.
Yeah. Isn't it weird that some people have never felt that? I feel like that I want to change that. I would like everyone to feel that feeling.
Totally. Yeah. It's definitely an essential part of being a human, I think.
I agree. So listeners, it doesn't matter what it is, but try and find
make
that
stuff.
feeling. Make stuff and lose yourself
Just
in
make
it.
stuff.
And you'll get addicted to it, because look at the two of us. Clearly.
Yep.
We're junkies for whatever that thing is, that flow state. This is where you end up.
There's so many different ways to get there.
Yeah, I agree. Even like simple things can bring you there. It doesn't even need to be like making a high scale art or something like that. Like, I think there are so many paths up that mountain. So just take them. Just try and find them for you.
That's right.
And with that, I feel like that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. Heartwarming little send off for everybody that made it to the end of this pod. Luke, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
And check out your website. You want to plug anything else? You got the tour coming up. Definitely go check out Luke on tour.
Yeah, come on out. See if we're playing in your city.
And your website, is it just greatgoodfineok.com?
Yep.
Sweet.
Yeah, and we're on, got all the social media. Great Good Fine Okay on Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm Luke Moellman on Instagram.
Check them out.
It'll
be worth it. And if you want to hit me up, slide in my Reddit DMs. You could be my 8th Reddit follower. You go to scoobert.doobert.pizza. You can find all of my links there. Feel free to hit us up and send us any questions. Slide in our DMs. All that good stuff. Thanks so much, Luke. Really appreciate it.
Sounds good. See you next time.
See you next time.